critical theory in of itself says that every argument that you have against it is rooted in some form of white supremacy. So if you're arguing from a position of supremacy because you were raised in a culture of white supremacy. So critical theory in itself is, you can't even argue against it, which is not logical.
By the way, this teaches that if you're a minority, you're a victim and nothing but a victim.
Yeah.
And if you're white, you're an oppressor, nothing but oppressor, and will always be that way.
To think that we're going back to a failed philosophy of Karl Marx and guys like John Dewey and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and G.W. Hegel, that has led to communist, to Soviet Russia and the Bolshevik Revolution, that led to Red China and the rise of Mao Zedong and Pol Pot and the killing fields of Weimar Republic in Cambodia. To think that we're taking ideas from individuals that were influential in leading those revolutionaries is just baffling to me. I mean,
your point is correct. This is anti-American, it's anti-people, it's anti-religion. This is oppression. This ideology has led to the death and slaughter of hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, and the oppression of hundreds of millions more. The polling is solid on our side. People don't want this, right? 75-80% of the people are opposed to this stuff. As we get political, Republican Party was formed to fight slavery. Republican Party fought the Jim Crow laws. The Democrat Party was Jim Crow laws. The Democrat Party came up with segregation. They came up with Ku Klux Klan, et cetera, et cetera. They fought civil rights laws. People that have not been active before are very active now. And they're involved, they're paying attention, they're going to the meetings, and these school board members should be on notice. You listen to the parents or you're out. These school boards do not own these kids. They're not in charge of these kids. They're the parents' kids. They're not yours. The department can set up the standards, what they look like and benchmarks, but they cannot tell the districts and the local schools how to implement those. So the local districts have the power and authority to choose the curriculum and how they're going to teach it. I think right now the power is in the hands of the parents and local districts. The answer is, again, more voices, not fewer voices. The answer is not grievance, but unity. The answer is teach kids to be good citizens, good people, respect one another, and that no race or group or individual is superior to another. Plain and simple.
Great news, folks. We are now on iTunes. You can now you can subscribe, you can leave us a review for Minnesota Uncensored on iTunes. We're still on Spotify, we're still on iHeartRadio, and on Stitcher. Also, Senate District 57 Republicans, you can find us on YouTube and on Facebook. Continue to continue to comment, continue to share. And now to this episode with State Senator Roger Chamberlain. Today is going to be another great episode. Last 4 episodes, we've been pounding home about critical race theory. We had the last episode, we had from Take Charge Minnesota, Alfreda Baldwin, who spoke on what was happening within the education sphere and offering the opportunity for school choice. Well, today I was able to get on State Senator for District 38, Roger Chamberlain, and I guess I'm going to have him kind of explain. He's been a senator there since 2010. I've been elected 4 times. I'm going to have him talk about what exactly committees he's on in the Senate. And then we're going to go full force into what we've been talking about, the education sphere, because obviously this November, we have a huge school board elections coming up. So, Roger, how are you doing?
Good afternoon. I don't use Skype much, so it's working out good so far. Good to see you.
I see you too. So, tell me a little bit about your experience in the Senate and some of the committees you're on.
As you said, I got elected in 2010, started serving in 2011. I live in Lionel Lakes. I've been serving this area the whole time, of course. It was District 53, now it's 38. I in 20 got elected in 10, re-elected in 12, and 16 and 20. Been good enough and fortunate enough and blessed enough to serve the people up here in this district. 2016, we won the majority. I was given the opportunity and honor to serve as tax chair. So I served as tax chair in the Senate for 4 years, and then they asked me to take on K-12. So I've been chair of K-12 this year and presumably next year too. I have been on K-12 for the entire duration of my Senate career. So of all the committees I have been on, including chairing tax, this committee I have served on since 2011. It has not been easy, obviously, over the years to see what's going on. But 2012, 2020, I got to chair it, so we had a bit of a run and were able to do a few things. But of course, being in controlling only one body, it was hard to do much reform. So, but that's the short and dirty, and I've been honored and privileged to serve in those capacities over the years.
So we might as well just get right into it. This year, so I talked offline with him a little bit. This is the draft for social studies. Every 10 years, they have a draft for social studies. And this year they're drafting up the new standards for social studies. And they are currently on their second draft. When I'm talking about I'm talking about the 36 members of the Social Studies Board for the Department of Education in Minnesota. Second draft is out. Have you had an opportunity to look at it, and what are some things that you possibly saw in there that would be concerning to you in our education, in our social studies program?
Yeah, I have had an opportunity to look at it in the first draft. It had been some time. First draft came out sometime in February. Just a quick refresher. It's not a lengthy or complicated statutes that deal with this. 120B, 02, 021, 023, and a little bit 024. So, and they're not complicated. They're pretty straightforward statutes. There are many aspects to those statutes and how they require the department to deal with these issues, but I won't get into that right now. But, just the high level view is that, I'll just use an example. I was in Rapid City this last week with my bride, little getaway with some friends out there. And if you've been to Rapid City, in downtown Rapid City, they have statues of most of the presidents of the United States. And they have little plaques on them about who they were and when they served. They also have American Indian statutes out there. And one of those statutes talked about we're all related. And to an extent, that is, I would agree 100% with that. We're all related. We're one human community. We have some shared values, common things in common. Of course, there are differences. But the social studies standards that they have put out have taken a completely different track and direction from where we have been in the past. Instead of taking a warts and all sort of approach to our history and our culture, all the cultures, Native American, Indian, and all the others that make up our great country, these standards in the second draft appear to go even further, to ignore that we're all related sort of idea and unifying, and instead throws sand in those gears. It just derails that idea and kind of biases in every aspect of it. Every standard, every strand buries in it grievance studies. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't talk necessarily largely about unifying and all that stuff. It just veers away from our history, our culture, and being neutral and balanced. Neutrality and balance is lost in their proposals. So I believe, more voices are good. More voices. But what they have done, again, is removing voices, removing critical information, removing stuff that benefits all people in this society and culture. They've created an imbalance, taken away that neutrality, and swung it in a completely different direction. So we believe in more voices, bringing them in, but not only did they do that, but they eliminated much of the other stuff. So, and that's troubling and concerning in many aspects.
Yeah, to give a little refresher, so out there, everyone's hearing critical race theory. You hear it on mainstream media, you hear it in outlying media sources. So critical race theory is an understanding that who we are, the laws we have in place, histories that we've been handed down have been shaped by race. It's an academic framework that is more than 40 years old. The idea that racism is both systematic, not just a product of an individual bias or prejudice, but is embedded in our policies and legal structures. Critical race theorists shift the focus away from individuals and actions towards how those systems instead look at the actions towards those systems and how they uphold racial disparities. I could say that there's three fundamental tenets. It's American institutions, political, legal, and cultural, are permeated by systematic racism. Race determines, number two, race determines identity, who we are. We are members of racial groups first, and individual human beings only secondarily. And three, life is both relentless, zero-sum power struggle between racial groups, oppressive groups, and victims. The dominant versus the non-dominant groups. So that's just kind of a refresher to anyone listening what critical race theory is. And I think by your explanation, you would say that this kind of bastardization of history, this non-unifying kind of that, like you said, you went to Rapid City, you saw that it kind of said, we're all American. We all have gone through the same journey, the same American experiment that was put in place 250 years ago. I mean, 400 years ago when the colonization period happened, 250 years ago when we gained our independence. But the whole critical race theory imputation into our education sphere first was in the universities and now has gone all the way down to K through 12 is not that. It believes we are all Black, Indian, Chinese, Europeans, and then whoever the majority group was is basically the oppressor. And every single other person who's not in that majority group, who was not part of the founding group that wrote the documents for wrote the Declaration of Independence, who wrote the Constitution, who framed the governments of this country, are the oppressor. So just to kind of go back and specifically address our social studies, it's no longer teaching us history, it's teaching us critical race theory.
They call them, so we have standards, right? We have Minnesota, we have 7 standards. Feds require 3, language arts, math, science. And the social studies, health, FIED, I forget the other one, are Minnesota standards. So we don't need those standards for Fed requirements, they're just Minnesota. So, and in those standards, the social studies standards have 5 strands, history, economics, government, civics, and one other thing. 4 strands. They added ethnic studies. Yep. Nothing wrong with that, but the language of critical theory, as you correctly cited, and you talked to Alfreda and Ms. Baldwin as well about these issues, it's been around a long time, but the language that they use in that doctrine, in that ideology, in those grievance studies, is oppressed, equity, constructed, that their idea of this is there's never any peace, there's never going to be any resolution of this, that we're always going to be in this state of upheaval, that where, as you had correctly stated, Tyler, and I agree, that we're all part of groups before individuals, and that does a disservice to everybody and to the children, and not only to the children, but our culture and community and nation. We can teach history and social studies and teach, as people had said, and you would understand, warts and all sort of thing has been mentioned a lot. That's fine, but that's not what this is. This is a complete doctrinal, ideological change, and they're trying to embed it in every aspect of social studies, not just ethnic studies, but through economics and grade levels. Let me just mention this, and I'll shut up again, Tyler, is that these things are supposed to be clear, concise, measurable, objective, and grade level appropriate. And as a colleague and a coworker of mine states, they blow that right off the bat. If you look at these things, and they're not hard to review and go through, there's a lot of pages because it goes through all 12 grades. Kindergarten is supposed to look at objective standards of, where is it right here? Use historical methods, and then understand the ways power and language construct social identities of race and ethnicity and gender. That's a kindergarten grade level benchmark. So again, we go back into social studies. These social studies standards from the start, from the jump, have been set up not to deal with these issues in a fair, balanced way to present objective, measurable, grade appropriate, concise, and clear standards. But as you sent to me, the 37, 38 people on that board, there's not many parents, there's not many business organizations. It's pretty well stacked, and the stuff they're putting out here in these standards, it's clear that they're going to do a disservice to our kids and to the families. Instead of bringing it all in and bringing new voices in, I can't say it enough, they're eliminating voices, they're eliminating dates, and they're skewing towards this ideology of grievance and separation and divisiveness. So I'll be quiet now.
No. Once again, I'm having you on here, and you're helping to educate me, and I definitely want to hear how someone who's as an acting legislator, and actually, I'm going to quickly touch on something, but I'm actually going to go back to asking you a question about what specifically legislators can do. But one of the lead intellectuals on the social studies board is Maurice Bloch, who is a PhD in critical pedagogy, and you could say right there that could be problematic when the one of the lead framers of the draft has a doctorate in critical pedagogy. I mean, that right there should kind of should cause a red flag. How do you believe this came about? How did this come about where you're having this being presented as a possible K through 12 education here in Minnesota and abroad in all of America? You see all the school board speeches online of people speaking out against what is happening. How do you think this came to be kind of mainstreamed? Because, as you say, it seems so not objective. It's subjective. Critical theory in of itself says that every argument that you have against it is rooted in some form of white supremacy. So if you're arguing from a position of supremacy because you were raised in a culture of white supremacy. So critical theory in itself you can't even argue against it, which is not logical. That's not in an intellectual society, in a truth-driven society. To find objectivity, you have to argue against ideas. Our Constitution, you had the Federalists and you had the Anti-Federalists. From the very beginning, our society's been founded on some people really agreed, other people didn't agree. And that's the foundation of American culture. So how did this become even a thing? How do you have someone with a critical pedagogy doctorate? Well, how is she on a board framing a social studies curriculum? As
you know, a couple things. Obviously, race is part of our culture and our history, and it should be addressed as such, and with facts and information, and recognize the problems with slavery and the challenges race and the Jim Crow laws, et cetera, et cetera. Just as a quick aside, as we get political, Republican Party was formed to fight slavery. Republican Party fought the Jim Crow laws. The Democrat Party was Jim Crow laws. The Democrat Party came up with segregation. They came up with Ku Klux Klan, et cetera, et cetera. They fought civil rights laws, just as a little bit of an aside. Now, how did we get here? Well, as you recognize and mentioned earlier, it's been a long time. The stuff isn't new. It's been around 30, 40 years. You do the research, and this sort of thought started a long time ago and didn't necessarily originate here. There are places overseas, Frankfurt School, that I learned that it was part of. So it took a long time, long process. They wrote a lot of books. It started to pick up in the 90s. It gets into the college academia. That starts to get into the teachers' prep courses, and people aren't really paying attention, right? They send their kids to school, and it goes okay, and they trust them. Then it gets more implanted in the schools. The last review was in 2010, where things started to change a little bit, but we still held the line on these standards. So a long process, from the academics into the colleges, into the prep courses, into the schools, into the school boards. So it takes a while to trickle out and trickle down and get through. Then we had the pandemic. Most people still weren't paying attention because they've been doing this stuff in some schools. Two pieces now. Then we had the pandemic. Kids had to stay home. Parents started to see what was going on in schools. Then they started to say, hey, why is my child being taught that being a white heterosexual Christian male is oppressive, and why are they being set up in school and being humiliated? Why aren't they being taught that we're all have commonalities, and yeah, there are, the whole thing we talked about. There are problems, but let's address them in a civil way. That's kind of got exposed, right? You seeing there, parents seeing this. So then nationally it gets put out there even more. Now, Carver County had an issue about a year and a half, 2 years ago before the pandemic. I don't know if you're aware of it. The parents out there started looking into a bonding issue, and they found out that Equity Alliance was doing an audit. They started digging into this. They ran it. In Minnesota, they were the first district and the first parents to find out what was going on. They did FOIAs. They found out a whole lot of stuff. They beat most of the bonding requests. The superintendent left, and they stalled this for a while. So how did they get here? Long time, slowly, people not really noticing, trusting the system. We became aware, I believe, because of the pandemic, kids home, parents woke up, said, whoa, 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 and a couple of high-level events went on as well. Then, of course, tragedies like George Floyd and others brought things to the fore. So that's how I believe we got here. And legislatively, we got out of making curriculum standards, not curriculum, but standards back in the early 2000s. So they just said in the statute, here you go, do it every 10 years. So that's how you go. Slowly but surely they get in. They don't need us. They just get the governor's house, and then they make rules, regs, and they ignore the legislature. So that's how we got here, in my humble opinion.
So that was going to go on to my next question. So you kind of said that basically the legislator, so yourself or in the education committee, there is not a lot they can do to combat what exactly is going into curriculum. Is that a correct?
So the way the statute is set up is that it requires the department the state establishes the standards, 7, and then addresses the department to review these standards in these particular areas every so many years, and it's put in statute. But it also directs the department, said the department can set up the standards, what they look like in benchmarks, but they cannot tell the districts and the local schools how to implement those. So the local districts have the power and authority to choose the curriculum and how they're going to teach it. So what can the legislature do? Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's only 3 standards required by Fed law: language arts, math, and science. The other 3, Phy-Ed, health, social studies, are not federal required. The legislature could say we could get rid of the state requirement for social studies standards. That's a double-edged sword, right? You could do that. You can always go back and try to put new things in statute and language to rein things in. So we can always make law. You have to have the House agree and the governor has to sign it. That's just not going to happen right now. They have an agenda. They're going around the legislature. They're going around the parents, and they're trying to jam this stuff, this divisive grievance study stuff it's anti-American, anti-people, anti-kid, anti-Christian, anti-Muslim, it's anti-Jew into the districts, into the curriculum, the standards. They've removed every reference, almost every reference to religion in here. Religion is a huge part of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean you teach it, but you make sure you know about it. Among other things, dates and times with wars and other issues, religion is almost completely taken out of this thing, and what is put in. So we're removing voices in we're putting all those other things in and removing voices. So the legislature can do a lot. You just need both bodies to agree and the governor to sign it. You could remove funding. So there's a lot we could do. It's just you got to get agreement from everybody. And I think right now the power is in the hands of the parents and local districts. They are taking that leverage and they're taking it to them, and rightfully so.
So, fair summary. Correct me if I'm wrong. You would say, first and foremost, parents get out there, combat them at the school board level. Second of all, probably you would agree, get some better school board people in there. Get people that will hold them accountable, will hold the superintendents. In my district, what I realized, the superintendent's a very powerful person. The superintendent in my district makes more money than Gavin Newsom does as governor of California.
Yeah.
The powerful person. School board will influence who gets to go in there. So then elect good school board people. And then you said without saying that it would help if you can get in your candidates of choice and try to take the majority in like the House, take the governorship, and then you could possibly do things like take away funding from the education from districts, possibly from education overall, if they are doing something that is something that could be not at a consensus within the public sphere. Would that be a fair summation of what you said?
Yeah, I think it is. It is. I mean, right now, parents, as you are probably aware, Tyler, I am aware that all across the state, from Sartell to your district, Lakeville, White Bear, ISD 12 up here, parents, people that have not been in active before are very active now. And they're involved, they're paying attention, they're going to the meetings, and these school board members should be on notice. You listen to the parents while you're out. These school boards do not own these kids. You're not in charge of these kids. They're the parents' kids. They're not yours. And we have a right to debate these issues without being shouted down. So the power right now is in the hand of the parents, going to the meetings, getting rid of school board members that don't agree. And then, if they can't do that, take your kids out of school, because this is dangerous stuff. Exactly. And what are they learning? Our education system, there's a lot of great educators and a lot of great teachers, and some good schools in the state, but a lot of them are just teaching junk, and our kids aren't reading properly, they're not doing their math, et cetera, et cetera. So you can always get them out of school, just read to them at home, you'd be better off, or get them in another school, something. So we still have that power and that leverage to do that. So your summary is good. That I just tagged onto. There are things that parents and the legislature can do, and it depends. It matters who you vote for. It does. So God willing, people are seeing the terrible corruption of what's been going on over the years. So yeah, good summary.
And I think the thing that has been, well, I mean, I'm a Republican. I'm doing a Republican podcast, but just how the Democratic Party in no way is combating this. Many of them are lying and saying that it's actually not happening, despite you can read for yourself. And I think a lot of us in America are intelligent people. We have the ability to read something and comprehend it and see they are indeed dividing on racial lines. And there's almost no denying it. But many Democratic politicians still until this day will deny that it's actually happening, which is just comical to me. I also agree with your summary. If they're not going to do it, and I actually believe the bottom line is if it starts hurting them fiscally, you could see a change of course. So you're taking your kids out of these local school districts, they're losing funding. They lose every child that leaves. The funding either follows them to a charter school, or they end up still paying the property tax for like a kid that's homeschooled or private schooled. But they do lose a good amount of funding. So I agree. As someone who I was a homeschool and private school kid, and my kids will go to charter school, and I'm actually going to be a part-time civics teacher at a micro homeschool. So I'm very much a proponent of, you know what, if they're not going to do it right, we can do it. We have talented people on our side that can help people get through this time, help their kids learn. I mean, I would, even if someone's super qualified, but they're going to teach that shit, sorry for my language, it's no good teaching them. In the end, that's very detrimental to a kid in the long run. I'd rather have someone who at least just attempts to teach a kid in a systematic manner, in an objective manner, and not try to turn them into revolutionaries, because it can happen. You take a generation and they're taught this, the future is not good for America. It's an existential threat.
I agree with you. This doesn't benefit our kids and our communities for the future. If you're teaching grievance, hate, and division, that if you're white, this is you. If you're black, that's you. By the way, this teaches that if you're a minority, you're a victim and nothing but a victim.
Yeah.
And if you're white, you're an oppressor, nothing but oppressor, and will always be that way. This is, as Alfreda probably told you, and she gave the commencement speech to Concordia College. I mean, if you're a Christian or Muslim, this is anti-religion. It's anti. You can't reconcile this with Buddhism. You can't reconcile it with Judaism. You can't reconcile this with Christianity. You can't reconcile this with Islam. This is anti-religious. It's anti-human. It is divisive. And it is a threat to the community, to our society, because you will just be dividing each other by groups. This is Hunger Games. Let's take a pop culture thing, right? Hunger Games, they put them all different camps by race and class and ethnicity. This is Hunger Games. I mean, they write the movies to fit this, right? And it's out there. So as Americans, as good citizens, as good people who want good communities and strong communities, this is not the way to go. And by the way, polling is solidly opposed to this sort of teaching and indoctrination. And it's not a black-white thing, because obviously Alfreda and Vadi Bachman and many others are opposed to this stuff because it's hateful, it's divisive, it's harmful. So I'll just sum up by saying, the answer is, again, more voices, not fewer voices. The answer is not grievance, but unity. The answer is teach kids to be good citizens, good people, respect one another, and that no race or group or individual is superior to another. Plain and simple. We don't have to put this stuff into our curriculum to do this to our kids. And we have power. As you said, you get them out of school, support school choice, support ESAs, get the school board members out, then the superintendent goes, take control of your kids' lives in your districts. It's not easy. There are going to be sacrifices, and families will be divided over this. Believe me, I've talked to them, and we all struggle with it, right? Families get divided. But you're right, I agree. You make a good point. It is a threat to the long-term health of this society and this community. And maybe some people like that, but I don't.
Yeah, and I'm actually reading a great book on it right now that kind of goes into detail about it. It's called American Marxism by Mark Levin. I'm sure you're a fan of Mark. And it's rooted to think that we're going back to a philosophy, a failed philosophy of Karl Marx and guys like John Dewey and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and G.W. Hegel, that has led to communist, to Soviet Russia and the Bolshevik Revolution, that led to Red China and the rise of Mao Zedong and Pol Pot and the killing fields of Weimar Republic in Cambodia. To think that we're taking ideas from individuals that were influential in leading those revolutionaries is just baffling to me. I mean, if you're going to use progress, this progressive movement, it goes back to John Dewey. Use someone that was successful, man. Do the ideas of which is America. But go to the ideas of people that Aristotle, Socrates, like the classical thought in Greek. Don't go to Karl Marx, whose ideas led to millions and millions of people dying and destruction of societies.
Well, you could focus on that a bit, right? Is that, again, they'll come back and say, this isn't about race and ideology. This is about history. It's not about history. It's not about ethnic studies. Those are euphemisms. Your point is correct. This is anti-American, it's anti-people, it's anti-religion. This is oppression. This ideology has led to the death and slaughter of hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, and the oppression of hundreds of millions more. You scrape back the frosting, whatever analogy you want to use, right? You pull back that curtain, peel off the orange, and it's nothing but rot and nastiness underneath. Can't reconcile this with any religion. You can't reconcile this with good societies and communities. Ethnic studies and history is a smokescreen. It's a euphemism to cover up this rot and this destructive stuff. And we have power. We should teach kids to be good people, good citizens, and more voices are good. I don't want somebody out there to listen to Chamberlain. More voices are good, and we should. There are alternatives to this. This is not teaching history. This is teaching hate and oppression and grievance. If you teach that, that's what you're going to get out the backside: hate, oppression, and grievance. And some people want that. They want division, right?
Yep.
So it's a struggle.
And just to touch on, you've talked about ethnic studies. That is probably one of the main American experiment really pointed out the ethnic studies portion. It actually is not allowed under state law. So they're actually not supposed to be implementing ethnic studies into social studies standards because of state law. You probably know that. So
it's a fine line. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 7 standards, right? The broad one: math, science, social studies. Social studies has what we call strands: geography, government, civics, history, economics, combined. So we have 4 strands. Now, we had some folks look into this, and it is debatable, but the statutes that address standards and benchmarks don't talk about strands. Now, you can say that, well, it wasn't in there initially. You could say, well, because it wasn't there, it shouldn't be there. It doesn't. The language doesn't say you can't do anything else or take more out. It doesn't say you can add more or take less. But it's silent on it. So you could argue that it is against the law and violates statute because we only have 4 strands listed in there, and they're adding another strand. So I don't disagree with you, but we had some folks look at it, and I think you can make a case that it only has these 4, so you can't add the 5th. So I don't disagree, but that's just kind of how some folks look at it.
Okay. Thanks for filling me in on that. We're almost done here, but I did want to ask, so have you in the Senate been, what has the chatter been like among, I kind of know what the Republican side, or have you with your Democratic counterparts had chatter on this topic? And what is the or maybe with some of the guys in the House, what has been the feedback from the other side?
Well, a couple things. During session, they had put a lot of this language in statute in their proposals. They had a lot of language, right, for new courses and curriculum to be taught to kids. My concern was, well, we're not going to put that in there because that's critical theory language, right? But in the back of our heads, we knew that they can embed this however they want through the statute. And that's exactly what they did. So my Democratic colleagues across the aisle were fairly quiet and silent on this during session. And I had that in the back of my mind, and that's exactly what they're doing. They weren't grousing a whole lot because they were just going to take that and do it through executive fiat through the Department of Education and add ethnic studies and social studies, right? And they've only done, I don't think the first draft had this in there as part of a standard. If I reviewed it, and I don't think it was in there. So this had been added since. So they added this in there. They were quiet fairly quiet during session because they knew the executive branch would do this by fiat in the standards. Now, again, I would suggest that even though the statutes are silent on the strands, because we only listed 4, I think that is the intent of 4. So if someone's got enough money, they can get a class action together, install this. Now, the other side of this is that we did get language to delay the implementation of all standards, no matter what they were. Any of the 7 standards that were in the process of being reviewed to be implemented, we did get a 2-year delay on implementation at the school level of any standards. But they wouldn't take the stopping of reviewing these standards. So there's a 2-year delay of implementation. There is a window of opportunity. There are things for parents to do. There are things educators can do. There are things that legislators can do to be aware of this stuff. So, yeah, I think what I've heard from them is very, very zero, much for the most part, zero. The hardcore leftists will say, this is what it's all about. We have to teach these things. Well, this isn't history. This is, as we talked about earlier, it's something completely different. But the polling is solid on our side. People don't want this, right? 75, 80% of the people are opposed to this stuff. So if we believe that and accept that, the Democrats had to be concerned about it. They had to be concerned about the district level and the school boards. Now, make no mistake, right? They're going to be out there in force with their teacher union money.
Yep.
They're not going to sit around. So they decide. Other side has been quiet, and for the reasons I've stated. But the polling suggests that they're in trouble. They're going to have to try to reframe this. They've tried to. The body politic will decide, do you want to go for the suppression, the hatred, this divisiveness, this grievance stuff? You want to be perpetually angry and round us all up? Or do you want to work as a community and live with your neighbors? Or do you want to keep punching each other in the nose? So you have a choice, and this stuff is disastrous. And if they won't listen to us, they'll take them out of school, and that's what the parents should do. It's going to require sacrifices, and you're already doing it, right?
Yep.
And that's good. Godspeed and God's blessing to you and anybody who's doing it. That has to be our charge this fall, is taking down those school board members and realigning. Just another story, out in Rapid City, I was visiting friends, and the school board out there was going to go crazy with masks again. So they all got thrown out. They got thrown out. So, out. And it can happen. It can be done. Now, South Dakota, a little bit different setup, but it can happen here. The pandemic, ugly stuff. The silver lining to all this, parents are starting to pay attention. Citizens are starting to pay attention, and if they can't run, they should give money and knock on doors and go to the school board meetings. It's no longer a passive thing, because it's one thing if you want to give up your own rights. Another thing if you're poisoning your children's mind to hate their parents. And I just keep having this vision of Dr. Zhivago in my head, and that crazy guy that was the activist early on and became the guy in the train leading his Reds, slaughtering people and rounding others up to send them out into far-flung places to freeze to death. I just had this vision, and the only guy that was free was the guy that was arrested and in the train car in chains. He said, "I'm the only one free here. Everybody else was just had their minds and spirits co-opted." So anyway, I digress. A little culture there. So what you're doing is great. So God bless you. Great, and God willing, we'll have some victories this fall in the school boards across the state. So God bless you for doing it and for doing the podcast.
Yeah, and I'm Now, how I look at it is, first of all, I was born into America. I was born into the freest, most benevolent, charitable, well-written government, part of the founders writing our Constitution, that has ever been in my opinion, human history, definitely in modern history. So I think at times we've become entitled. My generation actually is one of the most disillusioned generations. We grew up with great wealth and great prosperity, and we have not grown to appreciate and to have great knowledge of what it took for America to get there. There was periods in my life as an immature man I didn't get it, but luckily I had a good education founding. I was raised on classical. I was very classically educated. So when I did mature and I did come back to my senses, I remembered what we're all about, and the great minds that helped to create what is America. And as Ronald Reagan said, your freedom is just one generation away from becoming extinct. And if we forget where we came from, what we should know, and what we should do moving forward, and most of all, we have to be courageous. We have to be brave. C.S. Lewis said, without courage, every other virtue is heedless. It depends on courage. So if the least I can do is raise money for people, knock on doors, speak up at school boards, and fight for my communities, my state, my country, then if that's what my life is all about, then it's worth living for. And I'm a Christian, and I believe that everyone needs to find Jesus, and I think he's the real purpose in life. Not everyone's going to, but as long as we have those values. Thomas Jefferson wasn't a Christian, but he once famously said, he's like, what makes it different in this nation is we have the same values and the same mores. The second that goes away, freedom will be hard to maintain. He himself, and he wasn't a Christian. So
yeah,
that's all.
That is so well stated, and it's so well stated. It's right on target. We are not perfect. We learn from our mistakes, correct those mistakes, and we need people like yourselves to have the fire and ability to carry it on. There are things worth fighting for, and we can correct our mistakes. We can learn our history, learn from it, but that's not what CRT, critical theory, critical race theory, critical social justice is. It's just not. It's grievance, it's hate, it's division, and we can do better than that. We can do, teach them to be good people, good citizens. So I give you a lot of credit for jumping in and doing that. You're right, well stated. So thank you.
And I give you a lot of credit, and I'm thankful for you for fighting in the Senate for the K-12, being on the committees, and being an outspoken advocate for continuing to have a objectively good education system. I appreciate you. You've served 4 terms now, I believe. You're on your 4th term.
Yeah.
And hopefully you stay in there, or if not, you recruit someone that can have the same kind of values in your area, and you're like, hey, you can carry on my mantle.
we will see what comes, but I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and bring some of those things up. I hope it was productive. I know you've had good guests on in the past, and we're going to keep working for school choice and empowering parents and empowering good educators and destroying this nonsense that they're trying to push out in there. But it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of information. So this is an important part of it, what you're doing. So thank you.
Awesome. So how can people reach you?
The best way is just go through my Senate site, which is easily found when you go to Minnesota State Senate. They can find me, and I have a phone number and an email there. They can contact me.
Awesome, guys. Well, Roger, thank you for coming on here once again.
Thank you so much. You take care.
You too. You have a great day.
Good luck. Bye.